Welcome back to 20 Minutes with 2020 Mendocino. This is episode 2 of our new podcast series where we answer questions directly from the public. If you'd like to submit questions for this podcast, please visit www.2020mendocino.com/podcast. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, check out all of our videos. And I'd like to introduce Adam, founder of 2020. He's going to be my co-host on this journey.
Hey, thanks, Carlos. Looking forward to episode 2.
Right on. So we received a lot of questions since our last episode. So I think it's time we begin theming our episodes. This is going to be a breeding episode. We have several breeding questions I'd like to go into. So we'll start with fruit of the gods. At what week do you pollinate your plants? Also, do you give your plants the same nutrient regimen as your flowering plants until harvest?
All right. Yeah, these are some good questions here. So for pollinating plants, this one can be a little complicated in that you have to read the plant itself. I think you've also got two factors because you maybe don't have pollen ready at the time you want it to, so you're kind of juggling two different things here. So assuming you have the pollen available and ready to go and you're just waiting for the female, I don't like to pollinate too early. So we usually like to wait until there's a nice little cluster of hairs. I hate to give an actual week time because it can vary so much on the different strains. I would say, some strains are ready in about 2 weeks, but I think overall the easiest way to maybe think about it would be is when the bud clusters are about maybe as big as your pinky. So you have a decent amount of hairs showing, and you can get those enough of them at one time. The one thing that happens oftentimes is that initial pollination kind of shocks the plant a little bit, and it essentially kind of really slows down on growing. And sometimes it almost you worry that it's not gonna to shoot out any more hairs, and then you're gonna not be able to basically pollinate more. But I think be patient because usually after a few days it starts shooting out more. So we typically lately we've just been kind of doing a gradual pollination. So we'll just either keep the male or the reverse plant in the room after that several week period, and just kind of letting it pollinate over time. Now you definitely don't want to push it too late. That's when you just are going to end up with a bunch of white seeds, and you do weaken the plant if you over pollinate it. So I think short about a 1 week time period is usually good, and get that male out of there. Get the pollen out. Don't just keep going on and on with it forever. One thing we've learned is if you do pollinate late, you still can get seeds even much later than probably most people realize, and they form really fast, but you do risk the chance of just having unviable seeds. So as far as the nutrient regimen goes, it's definitely read your plants is the best answer I have for that. They essentially do require a lot as far as just like an animal that's rearing a child. It has different nutrient needs, and it certainly is. Female plants can actually be pretty nutrient hungry, but it's very strain to strain. So you pretty much read your plants. I've heard of a lot of breeders that give a pretty high amounts of nitrogen because they say it kind of keeps the plant like in keeps them from ripening as fast. I'm not sure if that's true or not. It's not necessarily a method that we use, but I have heard about it from multiple different breeders that you boost the nitrogen and you therefore prolong the life cycle of the plant and increase the odds of getting better seeds and more seeds. But overall, I would say just plan on giving them a little bit more flowering formula than you normally would.
Right on. So for our follow-up question, we have Julio from Phoenix, Arizona. What is the best method for germinating stubborn seeds?
Okay, Julio. Well, this is a subject I know quite a bit about. I've germinated a lot of stubborn seeds over the years, and I consider myself a pretty good at getting those little guys to come out. So I can go through my method real quick, and I know everybody's got their own methods, and this is one thing about growing. I always stress is that whatever works for you, like just stick with it. You don't have to oversteer. If you got something that works, just keep going with it. But what we do, we just use the old paper towel method. I actually have a YouTube video on our technique that just kind of briefly shows what we do. But most people are pretty familiar with the method, the wet paper towel. I usually keep them in a fairly warm environment. I'm not really into heat pads, but in fact, oftentimes I just put them on like on a wireless router. But whenever I do like a actual temperature controlled, about 90 degrees seems to work perfect. And I'll leave them there for about 24 to 48 hours. And anything that hasn't sprouted, or essentially what I consider a stubborn seed, is a seed that hasn't sprouted in 24 hours, or I mean 48 hours. If it hasn't, then at that point I don't leave it in the heat, because you greatly increase the odds of a pathogen issue if you keep them in that warm environment for longer than that. So then I actually kind of do the opposite, and I move them to a really cool place. And what I found is, in that case, you can oftentimes get these seeds that will take weeks to germinate sometimes, but if they're in a cool place, they won't go bad. Whereas if you keep them in that warm spot, they're going to rot. And then of course, cracking the seed is another great method, which I've fully embraced, and in fact have recently invented and designed a really handy little seed cracker, which is available on our website. And it's very simple. It can do more than one seed at once, and it has a nice the design kind of prevents you from over cracking the seeds and crushing them. But normally, if I'm going to crack seeds, I actually do it after the first few days, because there's no point in cracking them if they're going to come out in 48 hours or less, anyways. But after that 48-hour period, you really start to push into the risking the embryo and the seed, and that's when I do recommend cracking the seed coat, and usually they come flying out the gate pretty quick after that. So I've even seen the tails come out in a matter of hours, and sometimes even minutes after cracking the seed coat. It's like they basically had built up pressure in there, and they were ready to come out. So, and yeah, I mean, I think this is a subject we could go back to for sure, but let's move on, because I kind of burned up some time on that one.
Right on. Well, if anybody wants to check out the seed cracker or any of our merchandise, just click the merchandise tab on our website. It'll link you directly to our Etsy shop. So, for another question, let's see. We have Kevin. Are autoflowers the best choice for growing outdoors? Adam, what do you think?
Well, you're that's a good question. So you're gonna get two camps of people with autoflowers. I like to always consider us, being 2020 as a kind of a neutral territory when it comes to autoflowers versus photos. Typically, there's usually kind of a one camp or the other, but we bat for both teams. So I'm actually a good person to answer this question, because I don't have a bias. So my answer to that is that really depends on your growing style. If you're a commercial grower, uh, I prefer light depth with clones. If you're looking for consistent, if you're looking for lots of units of this, of mass amounts of the same strain and the same phenotype, you're going to do a lot better with just clones and either light deprivation or full term outdoor. But for home grows, for small backyards, for back porches, autoflowers are great. They're super user friendly. They have a nice phenotype variability, which a lot of people like when they're home growers. So they get multiple phenotypes that they can explore, and with different effects and flavors and smells and everything. So, to me, autoflowers are really fun, and they're fun to grow with. But on our commercial facility that we operate, in California, we do not grow autoflowers because it's just not very practical for us. There is some outdoor growers that do, but it's that most of them grow for biomass. So the autoflower gets basically gets ground up and made into concentrates. So yeah, I think the answer, hopefully that answered that question.
Right on. Let's see. What other questions do we have here? We got a good one here from Steven. I'm really interested in some landrace sativa varieties, such as some particular strains from South America and Southeast Asia. Are these strains a good choice for growing outdoors in the US? And I think last season we had an example of that you can mention, Adam. Go ahead.
Yeah, we do have an example of that. So, and I've actually over the years had many examples of this. So the short answer is no. Most of the time, these landrace strains are not very good for growing in the U.S., especially the sativas. There's big fans of landrace. I'm a big fan of landrace strains. So, I'm not trying to steer people away from them. But the thing that people have to understand is that these varieties were bred either by nature or by man or both for tens of, hundreds of, or thousands of years in a very specific climate and environment. And so they are ultimately the perfect strain to grow in that climate or that environment. However, you get them out of that and out of their bubble, essentially, they typically aren't going to do as well. The landrace sativas from the equatorial zones are a great example. Last year we tried was it a mango biche, Carlos, that Carlos
Yeah,
had picked up from
yeah, that was a mango
Pet.
beach from landrace from Colombia. I picked up from a buddy down in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, so we literally had those plants still outside at Christmas, and they weren't even close to done. So of course, we're lucky we lived in an environment where they were still alive at Christmas, but it essentially was a really fun experiment that didn't really go anywhere for us. Now, they smelled great. They looked exactly like they should have, like super tall, huge, real narrow leaf sativa. And they smelled just like, like green mangoes. Uh, but the short answer is, if you are going to try to go with landrace in North America, in the U.S. and the 50 states, you should probably go for an indica from Afghanistan or from the Himalayan region or somewhere that has a similar seasonal cycle as we do, and that is your best bet. So, I have had really good luck with some landrace indicas. Not that there isn't some really good sativas that actually do work good, but most of them have some sort of hybridization going on with them that has made them work much better in our climate.
Okay, so I have an interesting question here. This is from James. Why don't people graft a few branches of different genetics together on a mother? Does it mess with the genetics? Also, why isn't gibberellin used when germinating seeds or in early stages?
Yeah, okay. So grafting. Now, I'm not an expert in this. It can definitely be done. I've known people that have done it. And I guess his question is, why don't people graft a few branches together on a mother? It does not mess with the genetics. It's the same thing as they do now with apple trees. You can go to Home Depot and buy an apple tree with 5 types of apples on it. I think the short answer is it would be a lot of labor for not much of a purpose. I suppose there's maybe someone out there that's an expert in grafting that could legitimately find a good reason to do this, maybe with a plant that has a really, really strong root base and strong stalk that can pass kind of those nutrient feeding characteristics onto branches from another strain. I'm sure it sounds like really fun experiments. I've never done it, and I know it can definitely be done though. I'm going to move on to question 2 and his 2-part question. Gibberellin used for germinating seeds. Actually, it is. It is supposed to be a method used for to help help bring old seeds back. I know some people that swear by it. I have experimented with it a little bit, and it never really made a difference. Although, I didn't do an official, legitimate scientific experiment, but I kind of toyed around with it. And I tend to have pretty good luck with the method that was brought up earlier, with the warm 24 to 48 hours, cracking the seed if it doesn't open up soon after that, and then putting them in a cooler place and letting them go for a while. So I think that answers James' question, hopefully.
Right on. I have a question from Tony. What is the difference in pollen production between a male, regular male, or a reversed female?
Ah, so that's a good question, Tony. So 9 times out of 10, the a male will produce way more pollen than a reversed female. Reversed females can produce anywhere between a non-viable amount of pollen to basically the same as a male, but that's a rare that's a 1 out of 10 situation. So what I've noticed, our experience is that about 10% of the time you get what I consider a complete failure. Now, when I say that, I mean you don't get a production quantity of pollen from the reversed plant. Although under a microscope, I have 1,000x microscope I use. There is pollen in those failed reverses, but it's not a viable amount for production. So if you work it really hard over the plant, you're going to get some germination, but it's very minimal. And I actually have a photo we posted on Instagram of a side by side of I believe it was a male versus a picture of a microscopic shot of a male with just basically loads of of pollen grains on it, and then a failed reversal, as I put it, with just literally you could count them, in the microscope slide, there was maybe a dozen pollen grains or something, compared to tens of thousands, or maybe even hundreds of thousands in in the other one. So I think that probably answers Tony's question there.
All right. Well, I think we have time for one more question. Now, this question came submitted anonymously, but it's an interesting question. Is there any difference in breeding indoor genetics versus breeding outdoor genetics?
Yeah, certainly. So that's a good question, and that's a good question for us, because that's something that, as breeders from Mendocino County and coming from the culture and background that we come from, we certainly kind of pride ourselves on breeding genetics that do exceptionally well in outdoor environments. Now, kind of my standard go-to answer for this generic answer that I give people is that more or less any strain that does really good outdoors probably does really good indoors, or at least does fine. Now, the opposite is definitely not true. So everything that can be grown indoors cannot just be moved outside and will just grow great. So and then I think the reason is obvious, is that the environment, the environmental control can be very precise indoors, and it can't outdoors. So you have humidity issues, and you have certainly climate change, different differences of climates throughout the day and throughout the seasons, and some plants just aren't happy with those particulars. Now, I do want to add that we breed in Mendocino County, so even for us, we're breeding for strains that do really good in our climate, which is particularly better than average climate for growing outdoor in than most of the United States. Not all of the United States, but probably definitely above average. And I get a lot of questions from people that, will this strain do really good in Maine, for instance, or in the Midwest where it's super humid? And a lot of times, my answer, I try not to just say, well, yeah, it does great in Mendocino, so it's going to do good there. I mean, we have a different climate than they do. So in general, what I look for when people ask for mold resistant strains or strains that maybe do good in their climate, I think the best thing to shoot for outdoor is anything that finishes, the earlier it finishes in the year, which is not at all related to the flower time that's listed on the seed package. Flower time could be 6 weeks, flower time could be 12 weeks. That really has nothing to do with when the plant finishes in the fall, because when it finishes in the fall is based on when the light cycle basically switch the plant over to flower, which can vary. So we always like to shoot for mid October to late September to mid October. Anything that finishes past the second week of October for us is risky, because we can get good weather through October, but not always. So in general, we shoot for those, the earlier finishing. The earlier they finish, the better odds you have of having a successful year with them. Hopefully that answered that question, but that's a great question that we can do a whole segment on as well. Breeding for outdoor cultivation and how we do it. I'd love to talk about that more.
Sounds good. So I think we're just at about our 20-minute mark, if not a little bit over again. So think this is going to conclude episode 2. Once again, everybody, please subscribe to our YouTube channel, like, comment, interact with us. If you want to drop some questions in those comments, we'll add them to our list. You can also submit questions on our website at www.2020mendocino.com/podcast. You can follow us on Instagram at 2020 Mendocino. I think that is a great conclusion of episode 2. Adam, do you have any parting words?
No, thanks. Thanks for joining us, and please submit questions. We want to keep this going, and hopefully this sparks some interest and sparks some more questions for us. So we really want to get into kind of episoding these out into different categories and subjects. So the more questions we get, the better we have, better we can kind of categorize them and really get these keep this thing going. So thanks everyone.
Stay tuned for episode 3 next week. We're going to be covering general grow questions. Alrighty, guys, have a good one.